The reason why I thought avoiding future failure is bad is that I don't think you should avoid future failure. I think you should try to fail. You should try to fail often. There's a lot of examples of failing often. Fail fast, fail as much as you can. Well, not maybe as much as you can, but fail a lot. When I used to work, a bunch of years ago, I used to work at Microsoft. And when I worked there, my manager told me, we expect you to make a lot of mistakes. Just don't make the same mistake twice. But you can make really big mistakes. You can lose millions of dollars in one big mistake. Just come back with what you learned from that. Make sure you don't do it again. And share what stupid things you did with everyone else so that they don't make the same mistakes. And there are a lot of examples of this. There's the whole idea of a just culture in healthcare, where they are starting probably in the last 15, 20 years. If a doctor makes a mistake, okay, it's bad. Don't try to. They are definitely not in the market that says fail often. They shouldn't fail often. But if they do, then you should learn about what went wrong, and it's probably going to apply to other areas. And it's that just culture that Dr. Sidney Dekker, I think was the guy's name, that John Olsball at Etsy read about. And that's where the idea of blameless postmortems comes from, is from that just culture. And actually, there's another example that just came to me today, because I went for a run this morning, super hot, super humid, going around the lake, what looks like a river, but it's actually, they call it a lake. I don't know, crazy. It is a lake? It is a river. It is a river. It's a Colorado, right? Yes. Okay. But it's called the lake. What's up with that? Dams. So, oops, I'm getting out of this view. So as I'm running around, I often listen to podcasts as I go. And this morning's podcast I was listening to was Tim Ferriss. And he was interviewing some guy whose name I've forgotten. But Tim Ferriss was interviewing this guy who was the manager for a lot of like rock groups and individual artists. And one of his bands was Alice Cooper. And apparently him and Alice Cooper had this agreement that they should try many things. And if they failed, it was okay, as long as they learned from it. It was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is another example just on the day that I get to talk about this. So I thought it was super cool. That was, I guess, one of the more recent sessions from Tim Ferriss. Anyway, so this session is called Data-Driven Postmortems. My name's Matt Williams. I'm an evangelist at Datadog. And I'll have one slide that talks about what Datadog is, but just curious, how many of you know who Datadog is? That's awesome. How many of you are customers of Datadog? That's pretty awesome too. So I've been in this role for a couple of years now, coming up to my 2-year mark. And in those initial talks, I'd speak to a group of, say, 50 to 100 people. And when I'd say, how many of you have heard of Datadog? There might be 5, 6, 7 people that raise their hands. How many are using Datadog? I'd be lucky if I had 1 or 2 that were actually using it. And God, how things have changed over the course of 2 years. It's really incredible. But if you have questions about this session afterwards, you can reach me on Twitter. I'm TechnoEvangelist. Or I am mattw@datadoghq.com. So you can send me an email. Now, I did promise you one slide on who we are. So Datadog is a SaaS-based infrastructure and application monitoring company. You load up an open source agent, a Python-based agent, on each host that you want to monitor. We're going to collect a lot of time series data about everything that's going on that host, as well as a lot of the applications that are running on that host. And we do this for a lot of really big customers, huge customers, and we'll do it for a lot of small customers that have 5, 10, 20 instances on AWS, all the way up into the 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 and bigger instances on AWS. And we're bringing in about, I think this number is old. Last year, I was able to say that we brought in, on average, about 12 billion metrics per day. And a few months ago, it was about 1 trillion. I expect that number to be a lot larger now. So I don't even know what the number is. It's huge. A lot of zeros on there. And when we collect all this data, we're intelligent dashboards and alerting, and making you have all the information you need to make really good decisions about how to move things forward. Now, what we do is kind of hard. We're dealing with a lot of stuff, a lot of metrics that are coming in. We're trying to do some really neat things with it. We're doing a great job, but we can always use more help, so we're definitely hiring. So if you're interested in a new career, we'd love for you to join us. You can either visit that URL or come talk to me afterwards. Okay, cool. So that's all I'm going to say about Datadog. Well, and then here's something about Datadog. That's all I'm going to sell about Datadog. So when a new developer starts off at Datadog, a new developer, a new ops guy, whatever it is, they're going to visit a wiki that we have internally at Datadog. It's the DevOps wiki internally. And one of the first things that they're going to read is this. The problems we work on at Datadog are hard and often don't have obvious, clean-cut solutions. So it's useful to cultivate your troubleshooting skills, no matter what role you work in. Okay. Often people are not going to have those troubleshooting skills when they start, so it's important for us to teach them. And one of the great ways that we have to teach them about how to troubleshoot, how to read metrics, how to understand what's really important is through our postmortems. And we've been using postmortems for a while, and we continue to work really hard at creating some great postmortems. Because as Henry Ford said, the only real mistake is the one from which we learn nothing. Kind of interesting that I showed this because just this past weekend, I was in Detroit visiting the Ford mansion and seeing a bunch of Ford-related things. So now I'm using a quote from Henry Ford. Okay, so only real mistake is one we learn nothing from. And then one other thing I keep mentioning, the word postmortem. A postmortem is an analysis or discussion of an event held soon after it's occurred, especially in order to determine why it was a failure. Okay, pretty important term. I got one other term that I might have mentioned already, and that is DevOps. So DevOps, what is DevOps? You get 10 people who are involved with somehow DevOps, and you ask them what's the definition of DevOps, and you'll probably end up with 100 definitions. But I think at its heart, DevOps is about one thing. It's about communication. Getting your dev team to communicate with your ops team and vice versa. It's not about hiring the DevOps guy to do the DevOps. It's about communication between those groups and getting them to work together. And if you want to expand that out a bit, you can say it's all about CAMs. So a few years ago, these two guys, whose names I always forget, Willis and Edwards, Damon Edwards, I think, and John Willis, were speaking at the LA DevOps Days. And they talked about CAMs. And CAMs is culture, automation, metrics, and sharing. 4 really important things when it comes to DevOps. And so you can kind of think of, here's an example of where, maybe it's not quite a DevOps picture, but we've got a scene from a great movie called Witness, Harrison Ford, I think Kelly McGillis, and a bunch of other people back in the 90s or early 2000s, I think 90s, maybe 80s. Amazing movie, and here they are, basically little kid sees a nasty murder, they get shipped off, they go off to the Pennsylvania Amish where nobody's going to find them, and while they're there, they happen to see a barn raising. And here's this example of a culture that comes together, shares their strength and their work to build up this barn. They're using technology from 200 years ago, but they're all working together and sharing so it's the C and the S of CAMs, which is pretty cool. You can introduce automation as well. Here I've got a crane, and now I'm able to do the work of all those, I don't know how many people were on that picture, but maybe let's say 50 or 100, and this one machine can do the work of all of them, maybe with one operator inside, and it's pretty amazing. And so now we've got the automation. I'll talk a little bit about metrics in a little bit, but CAMs is all about these 3 things, or 4 things. And our focus area for this session is really going to be about the culture and the sharing, because that's really important in coming up with great postmortems. So there's this idea of blameless postmortems, and I think I mentioned it right at the beginning. John Allspaw of Etsy kind of coined the term based on his readings of Just Culture and Sidney Dekker. And the idea is that people should be able to share what went wrong, not necessarily who messed up, but they'll probably volunteer that information anyway. But what went wrong? What were the thought processes that went wrong? Because there should be no blaming, naming, and shaming. They should be able to offer this information so that everybody learns how to avoid that particular problem next time around. In fact, the DevOps Handbook, book that came out this year, I'm not sure if it's like really published or just being given out by vendors. I got it from a vendor, I can't even remember, Zebia Labs, I think it's called, just a few weeks ago. And it has a section about creating blameless postmortems. And one of the lines in there is, instead of naming, blaming, and shaming, our goal should always be to maximize opportunities for organizational learning. So we should be able to learn from all the problems that happen inside your environment. A postmortem should not just be an excuse to lynch somebody or to bring out the pitchforks and stab them to death and kick them out of the organization. You should be using this information to learn and to find out how to avoid this problem next time around. And my build, maybe I shouldn't have done that automatic animation because now I have to wait for this build to finish, and it's going to finish in 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 5, I don't know. Can you see it zooming in? Isn't that amazing? Shouldn't have done that. Anyway, so I don't want to really go, there's a lot of detail about the blameless postmortem. In fact, you should go read this blog post by John Allspaw. In fact, you could write down this Etsy or a bit.ly URL, or just search for Allspaw blameless postmortem. You'll get a bunch of hits, mostly from his blog. The couple back in 2012, one in 2014. There's another post by Dave Zwieback, who also talks about this as well. And they go into a lot of detail. Pretty amazing articles. Okay, culture and sharing are great, but what about the metrics? So I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about metrics. What metrics are important? Because often I do a session and somebody comes up to me and says, this stuff is great, but what are the 4 metrics I need to focus on? You have this great tool. I love your tool. I love your dashboards. I love everything that you're doing. Just show me the 4 things I need to focus on, or 10 things, or 20 things, or whatever it is. And there's no way for me to tell you that. There's no way for me to tell you, here are the 4 metrics that matter everywhere. Because the metrics that matter depend on your business goals. I can't tell you what your business goals are, and the metrics that you're looking at should somehow relate to your overall business goals. And so I show this picture of maybe somebody driving along on a rainy street, and there are metrics here. And the metrics here are going to be different for different types of people. And here the metrics are going to be, where are the lines on the road? Am I staying in the lines? I see the rain's coming down. When did it start? I know how slick the road is based on how recently the rain started. I know how fast I'm going because I've got a speedometer right in front of me. So there's another metric that I'm looking at. I probably looked at the tire pressure sometime in the last few weeks, and so I know roughly how high that is. But there's a lot of other metrics that are being collected as well. If you got a car made in the last 15 years or so, it's probably collecting 1,000 metrics every second. You don't care about most of those. You just care about those key metrics, and you're focused on those. So it's really important to collect all those metrics, but you just focus on just a few. Speedometer, maybe if a red light pops up on the dashboard, that's kind of cool. But you don't really care about anything else until you go visit your mechanic when something goes wrong. Now, there's this great Twitter handle, Honest Status page. Postmortem, that would require us to have some idea of what just happened. Or our metric collection failed during what you call an incident, but we didn't capture it, so it didn't really happen. Things were unstable for a bit, but we fixed the monitoring threshold, so we're all good now. That should not happen. You should have some sort of platform that collects a lot of metrics about what's going on in your environment, and not say stupid things like that, although many of us say stupid things like that all the time. We think collecting data is cheap. You should collect as much data as you can about what's going on in your environment. Not having it when you need it can be really expensive. Now, if you've got a monitoring platform that you've built yourself and you're not able, for storage reasons or for whatever reasons, to keep that data for a long time, maybe you should consider outsourcing that specific role to another company. You can use us. We've got a bunch of competitors out there. Use any one of us so that you have that data when you need it, because not having it when you need it can be really expensive. But what do you focus on? Well, we think of three buckets that are super important for you to focus on. There are work metrics, there are resource metrics, and there are events. And one of them is really important. The other two are kind of nice to have. The work metrics are the most important thing. That's where you focus your time on. So what are the work metrics? The work metrics include throughput and success, errors, and performance. In the case of nginx, throughput could be number of requests per second, super important metric. Number of successes, number of 200 response codes, or 404s for errors, 500s for errors. And you don't want to just look at this kind of scalar value of 404s, hey, 10,000 404s. So what? I don't know what that means. But in a ratio of 404s to overall number of requests, that's a lot more interesting. 10% of my requests result in 404s. That's interesting. Maybe you can live with it, maybe you can't. 90%, that's probably bad. Hopefully you can't live with that. There are some people who can deal with more errors. I remember there was a time when I was at Microsoft, we were totally, completely different. But doing a migration from Novell to Microsoft, they said, oh, we got 90% errors, so oh, well, this is bad. Well, we can work with you to find a way to bring that number down so that all your users can to migrate to this Microsoft platform. And says, don't worry, we don't really care about our users. So that depends on if you care about stuff or not, I don't know. But you should be looking at percentage of success, percent of errors, and throughput and performance. Resource metrics. Resource metrics are mostly useless until you put them in context with the work metrics. So common resource metrics include utilization, saturation, error, and availability. Common utilization metric is going to be CPU utilization. You look at any vendor, any product out there, any tool that's looking at performance, looking at any of this stuff, chances are they're going to show you CPU utilization. And that is probably way up there for being the single most worthless metric to look at. It doesn't tell you anything. If your box is at 90% and another box is at 10%, is one better than the other? It depends on what they're doing. So it depends on those work metrics, like requests per second. Okay, I'm using 2% CPU and I'm doing 10,000 requests per second, and all of a sudden it drops down to 2 requests per second and 99% use CPU. Well, that becomes an interesting story. On its own, CPU utilization doesn't tell me anything. Same with saturation. Usually it's a good idea to keep your saturation, your queue length, down to 0, maybe 1. But, and usually a higher saturation, a longer queue length is probably pretty bad, but it depends. You can't really judge based on just that number alone. Events could be code changes, alerts, scaling events, and so forth. So code changes could be a GitHub commit or a Jenkins deploy. You look at that alone, hey, there were 10,000 or 5 or whatever Jenkins deploys in the last few weeks. Who cares? But if one of those resulted in all of a sudden everything tanking, well, that becomes an interesting story. There's also qualities of good metrics. Hopefully, you should understand what these metrics mean. If you don't know what the metric means, it's kind of useless. It should also be granular. There's some vendors out there that give you one number to represent the health of your application. Kind of a useless metric. You need to look at all those other metrics that go into a lot more granular detail. It should be tagged by scope. What's the scope? Depends on the application. You might have a scope of geography, a scope of, is it production or QA? It might have a scope of role web versus database versus something else. And it should be long-lived. It should be around long enough for you to be able to analyze and get meaning out of. And then you also want to recurse until you find the root cause. So you look at the work metrics, resources, and events, and you start going a level deeper. Maybe in the case of nginx, the next level down might be the database. The next level down might be the file system. The next level down might be the EC2 instance or whatever. So that's a little bit about metrics. What about postmortems? And who, what, and when? What stuff do we care about in putting in postmortems? First thing to say about postmortems, if you're still responding to the incident, it's not time to do the postmortem. Focus on fixing whatever's gone wrong, and then you can think about building up this postmortem. Okay, cool. So who needs to be involved with the postmortem? Everyone who is involved. It should be the responder, the identifier, the affected users, anybody else who was somehow involved in this whole thing that happened. What are you collecting? Well, you're basically collecting the perspective of all these people. What they did, what they thought, and why they thought what they thought, and why they did what they did. So John Oswald said, behind every seemingly technical problem is actually a human problem waiting to be found. This kind of indicates that maybe we should start blaming the users or blaming the humans, but it's not that simple. Yes, there's this human problem, but human error is not our cause of troubles. Instead, human error is a consequence of the design of the tools that we gave them. So the tools could be a product that you purchased and installed, or a tool could be the workflow or the decision tree that you came up with to figure out, yes, I should shut down that entire data center. Like what Joyent did a couple years ago. As Joyent basically took down their US East data center. And they came up with a postmortem basically saying, for next time, we're going to make it a little harder to bring down a lot of machines. Because basically what happened was some guy wanted to, update one server and bring it down and cycle it. And by mistake, he said, not one machine, but all machines. All machines. And they all came down, did exactly what he wanted, but just fat-fingered it, and yeah. So this is kind of a fun one to look at. You can look at it, you can search for, actually there's the link for the Joyent post. Check it out. It's kind of interesting reading. But there's a value in writing this stuff down. Writing is nature's way of letting you know how sloppy your thinking is. Whenever I do a talk, I'm going to write it down. Whenever I need to explain a concept to somebody, I'm going to write it down. Because usually if I just go to somebody and say, here's what really happened, they're going to think I'm a complete idiot because I can't get my thoughts straight. I need to write it down first in order to figure out, okay, here's the way it happened. Chinese proverb, one picture is worth 10,000 words. So it's not just about writing the text, it's also creating great pictures that describe what happened. Okay, so when should you collect it? As soon as possible. When something happens, as soon as it's done, as soon as you fix it, make sure you start creating this postmortem. Because memory drops sharply within 20 minutes. And then you start remembering things that didn't really happen. Because of stress, because of sleep deprivation, because you've been up for the last 24 hours, from burnout because you've been doing this for 12 months straight, because of blame or fear of getting fired if you actually say what really happened, bias, anchoring, hindsight. Everybody, hindsight's 20/20. So looking back, I could have done that. I should have done that. Or he should have done that. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. Those are not things you should be putting in the postmortem. Outcome, availability, recency. Outcome, it was good. It ended up all good or ended up really bad. That's going to affect maybe the way somebody says what happened. So that's kind of interesting. Now, how do we do postmortems at Datadog? We work really hard at providing this service that's always available for our customers. We're bringing in a huge amount of data from all of these enormous customers that are doing amazing things. But sometimes, things go wrong. And we want to make sure that when something goes wrong, we notify our customers as quickly as we can. And we notify them, and we let them know what's going on. We let them know when things are fixed, and we let them understand our thinking about what really just happened. Now, a few notes. When we do a postmortem at Datadog, we send it out internally to the entire company. Sometimes we send it out, if it's a really big outage, we send it out to our customers as well. Usually shows up on our blog or some other places. Maybe it gets emailed out to key customers. And we have recurring postmortem meetings. There's a postmortem meeting that basically happens every month, whether something happened or not. And basically the purpose of that monthly meeting is just to verify that all those to-dos that happened in previous postmortems are actually getting done. You also have bi-weekly meetings that focus on the postmortems that really did happen. And of course, then there's the postmortem meeting that happens right after a big incident or any incident. Now I'm going to show an example, and this is a real event that really happened to us back in March. It affected the public-facing web, basically Dog Web, which is the tool that, if you're a customer, that's the tool that you're interacting with. It's the dashboards. And we got this, all of a sudden we got this higher 500s responses percentage on outbound requests, no change on inbound. And first navigation got slow, then we got some down pages, and we saw more alerts on 500. So we have an alert that pops up that gets sent out if there's a large percentage of 5XX errors or response codes. And so our postmortems include a few different things. First off, what happened? We try to describe what happened kind of at an abstract level, just a scientific abstract. What was the impact on customers? What's the severity? What components were affected, and how did we resolve this issue? So just high-level stuff. And so here's a screenshot from the actual internal postmortem. We lost most of McNulty web and query capacity. Nodes were blocked on global cache, increased latency, 500 errors. Customers trying to access Datadog were shown a down page for long periods of time during the outage. Elena cache nodes seemed to be overloaded, especially on network side, and the outage lasted for about 2.5 hours. That was pretty significant for us. And then we show a picture. This actually, we subscribed to Pingdom, and we saw that latency spiked for a good couple of hours. By the way, all of our internal roles, you might notice I mentioned McNulty, Elena. Any idea where that comes from? Basically, all of our internal, everybody has their way of naming internal servers and roles. They come up with Star Wars characters or Star Trek. All of our roles come from The Wire, HBO TV show, The Wire. In fact, all of our conference rooms are named for places that show up in The Wire. So it's almost kind of, you read through the DevOps wiki, you also watch The Wire to make sure you understand how all these characters relate to each other, because McNulty is a pretty important guy there. Further down on the postmortem, impact on customers. When people try to access Datadog, they're shown a down page. And if they've already got an open dashboard, they're going to see that dashboard, and it's going to constantly refresh. All the graphs are going to refresh, but it's going to take a little bit longer. And we didn't have any problems with intake. So errors, metrics that are coming in, the trillion metrics that are coming in, they still keep coming in. We didn't lose any data, which is great. But it's a major outage. Datadog or Dog Web was inaccessible. The marketing site was fine, but Dog Web, the application, was inaccessible for about 2 hours. And it affected McNulty, and it affected snapshots and crawlers. So we're showing exactly what happened, and here's how we resolved the outage. See, Elena master nodes in US East 1A and B were replaced with something running in something. Okay, these are actual screenshots, so there's a few things that are hidden from all y'all, just in case you do something stupid or nasty. Okay, so the next thing is, how is the outage detected? Because we want to make sure that we found this stuff early enough, and we started working on it as quickly as we can. So was there a metric that showed the outage? And if not, let's figure out what that next metric should be. Was there a monitor on that metric? Was there some sort of notification? Were the right people getting notified about this problem? And how long did it take us to notify our customers about an outage? How long did it take us to say on our status page and other places to say that there's an outage? So usually if there's an outage, we're going to put it on statuspage.datadog.com. And we'll also post it on, I think it's Datadog Ops as a Twitter handle. So we'll notify people there as well. And so the screenshot from our postmortem. How was it detected? Pinged them, CloudWatch metrics, and HA proxy metrics from our agent said that there was a problem. Was there a monitor? Yep, the right people got notified. How long did it take us to figure out that there was an outage and start notifying people? About 3 minutes. So we did the right thing on this particular outage. We let people know as soon as we found out, within about 3 minutes, and we were able to recover eventually after a couple hours. Here's a bunch of the metrics that we're collecting. You can see latency ELB, latency stream on McNulty, service down, a bunch of other metrics that we're collecting, and we can see there's this massive spike right there in the middle. It's on the same point in time. How did we respond? So that's the next section. Who was involved? Who were the incident owners? Who else was involved? We rely heavily on Slack to show us the timeline of what exactly happened. Because all of our events, we have integrations with Slack or HipChat, depending on which one you're going to use. Internally at Datadog, we use Slack. And so anytime there's any sort of event, usually it gets shoved into Slack. And so that becomes our record of exactly what happened and when did it happen. Because that's also where people communicate between each other, saying, okay, here's what I think this error means, here's what you should do about it, here's how, all this stuff gets posted into Slack. We also show what went well, what didn't go so well. And so here's the screenshot from that postmortem. Who was the incident owner? Here's all the responders. Those are not actual people's names. We changed it for the purpose of the screenshot. Here's a link to the Slack archive. Here's, we have a bunch of graphs. We've tagged everything with postmortem. That way we can find things really quickly. And here's a notebook about this thing. There's also a timeline of what exactly happened. Now, I mentioned their notebook. This postmortem was written in the tool that we used to use for all our postmortems. A lot of people use different tools for postmortems. Etsy has a tool that they use internally. I believe it's called Morgue for postmortems, which I think was kind of fun. In a weird way. So they use Morgue. We always used to use Hackpad. Hackpad got recently acquired by Dropbox, I believe. And we've switched to another tool that we've been developing internally that we've started turning on for our customers in the last few days, I think, last few days or weeks, called Notebook, where you can go in and very quickly add metrics that you've been collecting in Datadog and add it to what becomes a postmortem or what becomes internal documentation. So ChatOps is huge for us. We are collecting all this data events and metrics get shoved into Slack, and there's a discussion about what really goes on. All those faces don't really exist at Datadog, except for Mark, whose name is really Alexei, who is one of the founders. It's kind of funny. We don't have anybody who looks that good. Anyway, and we're also tracking learnings as we go. As we learn more things, we're shoving it into Slack as well. We're responding in Slack. Hey, this particular group didn't get paged. We use PagerDuty. So how come we didn't get notified via PagerDuty about this particular thing? Why did it happen? Try to provide a deep dive into the cause. And we've actually got some examples. Here you can look at the status page for this particular instance. And you can also look at a blog post that Alexei Lacroix, one of our founders, wrote up about this particular incident. And so it was the public postmortem. We also include, how do we prevent this in the future? And so this is usually kind of a to-do list. Here's what we need to do in order to avoid this kind of problem in the future. It's good to have problems, but let's not have the same problem twice. So we link to GitHub issues and Trello cards. We use GitHub and Trello a lot internally. And we have 3 different buckets. Well, what we need to do right now, like now, today, or tomorrow. What we need to do next, sometime in the next week or so. And here's all the other stuff that we need to do later, sometime in the next month or so. And all those become tasks in Trello cards, and they often become GitHub issues and separate PRs. And also write up some follow-up notes. So how do we prevent it in the future? We ship fixes to Elena provision to account for kernel and Redis tweaks, and here are the actual GitHub issues. We add a monitor for the TCP rate, error rate on Elena. We had most of the monitors set up, but here's one we probably missed. It doesn't appear to be Elena-centric, but I'm reluctant to call this one done, so there's an ongoing discussion about these to-do items as well. And to recap, basically our postmortems at Datadog include what happened, how do we detect it, how do we respond, why did it happen, and actionable next steps. So there's a lot of great resources on this where you can learn more detail about how to write really great postmortems and what kind of culture needs to be in place for you to be able, for engineers to feel that it's okay to share that I screwed up. It's not just, it's very quick and very easy to go to a place where somebody speaks up and they end up getting fired over it. This is not the point. Yes, they should be accountable, but not place blame. And often the person who created the problem is probably the person who is most authoritative in coming up with the right solution because they had it was their thought process that created this problem, and they know how to think about it in the right way. So there's The Infinite Hows by John Allspaw, is a great blog post. Blameless postmortems don't work. Okay, he's focusing on just on the word blameless, thinking it doesn't mean accountable. It does mean accountable, but J. Paul Reed has this great blog post. And then Alexei Lequoc at Datadog wrote up Monitoring 101, a series of posts that really apply to whatever platform you have to be using. How do you think about metrics in general? And that brings me to the end of my session. It's 2:07. I got till 2:10. One more time, my name's Matt Wood. I guess my name's wrong. My name's not on there, but my Twitter handle is I'm Technoevangelist on Twitter. For some reason, they wanted us to put LinkedIn. I don't know how often I use LinkedIn, but there's that as well. Or just send me an email, mattw@datadoghq.com. Any questions?
Do you guys have a regular...
Somebody's taking a photo. Oh, sorry. I should come over here and smile. Hi. No? Okay. Sorry.
So you guys have a regular recurring postmortem.
Yeah.
How do you guys make that productive, and how do you guys make sure you've got the right people in the room?
We don't want to make it too big. I mean, so it's not going to be, the postmortem specified who was the incident owner, because there's usually one or two people on call at any given time. And there's usually, if it involved Elena or McNulty or something, it's the product owner, the main person involved, either for that product or for that team, who's going to be there as well. It's not going to be everyone, but it's going to be enough of the important leaders for all the different pieces. And it happens every month, and there is enough executive, I guess in a bigger company it would be called executive sponsorship, that this stuff needs to happen or bad things will happen to that. So we don't blame people, but if they don't start responding to and fixing these issues, fixing these to-dos, then maybe there's all those things that happen when there's a blameful thing. So it's just it's kind of in our culture to make these things, make it easy for everybody to produce as much data as they can about what really happened and how to fix it going forward. And then we just know that we all need to pitch in to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I think there's not really a guidebook to the postmortem meeting other than what's been written in a lot of different documentation about this. But it's mostly about the culture and having a culture that works with that. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Well, you got my contact information, even my LinkedIn. You got all that stuff, so you can reach out to me if you have any questions. You didn't feel like you could get up because all your friends are around. You don't want to sound like an idiot. You can send me a message directly and sound like an idiot there. Okay, so thanks so much for attending, and we're at 2:10, so get out of here and go find something else to listen to.